Hello, my friends. If you're listening on Thursday, April 4th, I will be hosting a hangout tonight at 8 p.m. East for all paid subscribers. If you aren't a paid subscriber, go to patreon.com/PeteDominic. Don't miss our hangouts each Thursday at 8 East. Look for the link in the daily email. Hello, my friends. I've got a great conversation with the always brilliant David Rothkopf beginning at 22 minutes into the show today, and a great news segment from Earth One. But I'm so sorry about yesterday. For those of you that listened before about 9 a.m. when I fixed it and re-uploaded the show, I loaded the wrong file. It was just the conversation with Waj and I. It was 5 minutes of silence, and it was agonizing to find out that so many of you had to deal with that. And my sincerest apologies. I haven't made a disastrous mistake like that in a while. It's a miracle because I check and then I check again, but I simply loaded the wrong file. I am so sorry. Thanks to all of you early morning listeners who let me know. And again, my apologies. I owe you. I know what I did, and I'll do better. Thank you very much for your grace and patience. Some are asking if I fired my fake producer, if I tortured him and chopped him up. The answer is yes. What's his name again? I forget his name, but it doesn't matter. He's dead. But of course he was to blame. So now that that business is taken care of, out of the way, hopefully we won't have that happen again. Let's get to today's news. Let's start with something positive. People are always criticizing the Biden administration and other Democrats for not doing a good enough job selling their accomplishments. Well, how about this? Yesterday, there was an event, a joint event. President Joe Biden teams up with Senator Bernie Sanders to promote the administration's efforts to lower the cost of inhalers and other healthcare needs. The White House continues to effort to highlight Biden's legislative achievements to voters ahead of November elections. I'll bring you some of the audio for that, but both men touted the lower healthcare costs that come through the Democrats' sweeping climate healthcare and tax package that President Biden signed into law in 2022, caps various healthcare costs for those on Medicare, including $35 a month for insulin and $2,000 a year for prescription drugs. No Republican lawmakers voted for that law. It's such a big deal, that alone. So I wanted to mention that story. Want to mention this also from yesterday. A federal judge blasted a convicted January 6th rioter for downplaying the U.S. Capitol attack and using the kind of revisionist rhetoric that former President Donald Trump often uses on the campaign trail. U.S. District Judge Royce Lambert said, "This cannot become normal. We cannot condone the normalization of the January 6th U.S. Capitol riot." Judge warned of a vicious cycle that can imperil our institutions if Americans upset with future election results resort to the, quote, vigilantism, lawlessness, and anarchy that occurred on January 6, 2021. I don't really like polls, much less surveys, but this one was interesting, and I just felt like it's worth mentioning. A new Associated Press Center for Public Affairs research poll found that 9 in 10 U.S. adults say the right to vote, the right to equal protection under the law, and the right to privacy are extremely important or very important to the United States' identity as a nation. The survey also found that 84% feel the same way about freedom of religion. The results, which included perspectives on a number of different freedoms and rights, have only small variances between Republicans and Democrats, except on the right to bear arms, which Republicans are more likely to see as core to the nation's identity. The overall findings are striking because they come at a time of extreme partnership when political agreements seem rare and concerns are heightened over the potential for violence during a volatile presidential election year. The headline on this piece, by the way, at the Associated Press: "Yes, we're divided, but a new poll shows Americans still agree on most core American values." What do you think of that? Here's another story I touched briefly on with David Rothkopf today, but the two brothers who helped fund disgraced former President Donald Trump's now public social media company, Truth Social, they pled guilty Wednesday to insider trading. The Schwartzmans, Michael and Gerald Schwartzman, they made millions by trading in shares of Digital World Acquisition Corporation before it merged with Trump Media, according to federal prosecutors. Who would have thought two criminal grifters would have been behind Truth Social? And they got caught. Each of them face up to 20 years in prison when they're sentenced in July, but prosecutors agreed to recommend a sentence about 3 years. They both pled guilty on Wednesday to one count of securities fraud. Again, the headline: two brothers who helped Trump Media Company plead guilty to insider trading. Special prosecutor Jack Smith is going after the federal judge in the classified documents trial, Aileen Cannon. The headline at Drudge: Jack Smith blasts MAGA judge. Will she be removed? Classified case turns hot. Lots to talk about that yesterday. I'm not going to go into it because it's legal analysis, and I'll do a whole segment with someone like Glenn Kirshner on that. But I don't really do it alone. I read the headlines, I follow it, I pay attention to it, and then I try to analyze it with someone who knows what the hell they're talking about. 7.4 magnitude shock earthquake off Taiwan, strongest in 25 years. Apparently, only a few people, unfortunately, died. 9 people, 50 are missing, but the biggest earthquake in at least 25 years on Wednesday, injuring more than 900 people. And the video is terrifying, by the way. Don't watch it, or do, and scare the hell out of yourself, if you live in a fault, I suppose. Oh, and speaking of terrifying or awesome, Apple computers now exploring the mobile robot that follows users around their homes. I'll buy anything Apple sells, so I cannot wait for my own personal robot. This sounds very, very exciting, and I'm just saying this to trigger certain people who know who they are that hate Apple. What else can I tell you? Outrage continues to spread about the World Central Kitchen workers who were killed in Gaza. I'll bring you some audio and report from Reuters on that in a minute. Jose Andres wrote an opinion piece in the New York Times today titled "Let People Eat." He said the team members put their lives at risk precisely because this food aid is so rare and desperately needed. According to the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Global Initiative, half the population of Gaza, 1.1 million people, faces the imminent risk of famine. The team would not have made the journey if there were enough food traveling by truck across land to feed the people of Gaza. The peoples of the Mediterranean and Middle East, regardless of ethnicity and religion, share a culture that values food as a powerful statement of humanity and hospitality, of our shared hope for a better tomorrow. There's a reason at this special time of year, Christians make Easter eggs. Muslims eat an egg at iftar dinners, and an egg sits on the Seder plate. This symbol of life and hope reborn in spring extends across religions and cultures. I've been a stranger at Seder dinners. I've heard the ancient Passover stories about being a stranger in the land of Egypt, the commandment to remember with a feast before you that the children of Israel were once slaves. It is not a sign of weakness to feed strangers. It is a sign of strength. The people of Israel need to remember at this darkest hour what strength truly looks like. Whew! Jose Andres, the chef and founder of World Central Kitchen, in an opinion piece in the New York Times. Uganda's constitutional court on Wednesday largely upheld a sweeping anti-gay law their president signed last year, undermining the efforts of activists and rights groups to abolish legislation that drew worldwide condemnation and strained the East African nation's relationship with the West. The White House yesterday expressed appreciation for the right-wing Daily Caller on Tuesday after the conservative outlet retracted a post that implied the Biden administration had instituted a new ban on religious symbols and Easter eggs during the holiday celebration. And the Biden White House gathering for Ramadan unraveled over Gaza. Some Muslim community leaders said it would be wrong to attend an iftar meal with President Biden while Gaza is under siege. One prominent doctor apparently walked out of it. So, well, that didn't go well, but they continue to try to reach out to the Muslim community. And crazy weather nor'easter here on the East Coast. I don't know how much rain we've got, but it's absolutely been crazy today. I don't really do too much about the weather, but I'll mention it if I see it, I suppose. And more importantly, it's not just clouds. There's a new weather threat for the eclipse viewers to worry about. I was thinking about going to Syracuse because Syracuse is right in the path where my parents live. My brother's going to head up there. But the highly anticipated total solar eclipse fast approaching, and now severe thunderstorms are possible in parts of the southern plains and lower Mississippi Valley, including in the path of totality. These storms could obscure the view for some, but are more likely to bring risks for post-eclipse travelers. Totality, when the moon will entirely block the sun, will occur along more than a 100-mile path from Texas to Maine, passing over cities like Dallas, Indianapolis, Cleveland, and Buffalo, New York. But now parts of Texas, including Dallas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana, are at an increased risk of damaging thunderstorms. So, especially during the evening hours, that's sad news if you're in the path of the eclipse and you were hoping to see it. Now you're also in the path of the storm. But plenty of time for that to change. 20 million people in the U.S. travel to another city for 2017's total solar eclipse. So also significant increase in traffic risks that I really would prefer to avoid. All right, those are your headlines. Let's get to some of the sound I brought for today's news from Earth 1. Actually, let's start with some takes from Earth 2. I've got 3 triggering clips from right-wing lunatics. Let's start with this one from this right-wing Republican Christian state senator from Minnesota. His name is Glenn Gruenhagen, and he says that sex education in schools produces dopamine and therefore causes addiction to porn. It's a long way to go, but he gets there in about 35 seconds. Brace yourself.
The other thing, explicit sexual information in our schools as a policy should be banned, because what it does is when you show small children or students explicit sexual information and pervert it, it sets off a chemical reaction in their brain called dopamine. Dopamine produces addiction. So you're producing addiction to pornography, and some of those young boys will turn into human sexual predators. And that's one of the reasons Senator Lucero's amendment, you should rule in favor of it, and we should vote on this. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right. Well, who wants to bet that that senator's internet history is littered with the worst kind of porn? Oh, no education or experience in anything, this guy, education, pediatrics, child development, or anything else that would give him any authority to make such insane statements. But, you know, a lot of homophobia, which he sounds like he might be attracted to a guy after a couple of Bud Lights, let's be honest. But, you know, climate change denial, anti-vax, promoting the big lie, that kind of stuff. That's what you can expect from guys like Senator Glenn Gruenhagen there. Man, Republicans are so obsessed with sex and so terrified of it. Someone should check on his family. All right, let's get to another insane person. This is Charlie Kirk of Turning Points USA. He's one of the worst people ever. And, he said this about women yesterday, and shocking that any women would ever like him or support him in any way, but that's why I play it.
We basically told a great generation of young women, don't get married, don't have kids, go get a corporate job. And it's created mass political hysteria. And then in their early 30s, they get really upset because they say, you know, the boys don't want to date me anymore because they're not at their prime. And people get mad when I say that. Well, it's just true. If you're in your early 30s, I'm sorry. It's like you're not as attractive in the dating pool as you were in the early 20s. But again, you have your corporate job and cats. So I thought, you know.
You have your corporate job and cats. I'm not sure who exactly he's referring that to, but Charlie Kirk met his wife because she was trying to apply for a job at his company. Instead of hiring her, by the way, he asked her to date him instead. So I just read that. I don't know if it's true, but I think it probably is. That's Charlie Kirk. He is a dirtbag and somehow very, very, very popular right-wing commentator. And I don't have much more to say about that, but I do have one more for you from Earth 2 Crazy Times. This is the Daily Wire's Matt Walsh, who once had all of Twitter calling me a pedophile, saying that Beyonce is not talented, which says everything about Matt Walsh, this guy.
But this is from Autumn. She says, Beyonce and mediocre don't belong in the same sentence. Well, I would agree if you're talking about her looks or her dance moves. Like, she's a good-looking woman, no question. She's a great dancer. But the truth is, and you know this, you know it deep down, Autumn, that if she was not an attractive woman, she would have no career as a singer. Like, you know, and that's not a statement that's true of every female singer. There are plenty of female singers who have had great careers, legendary careers, despite not being necessarily beautiful. And the reason that they had those careers is because their music was that incredible. But they're great artists. But Beyonce, take out the looks, and she's a passably okay singer who doesn't play any instruments, doesn't write her own music. So on talent alone, on merit alone, she's mediocre. Sorry to say. It's the truth.
Oh, all right. Well, that guy's whole thing is trolling and saying outrageous things, but him and Charlie Kirk and a lot of people on the right, they could never do that, not with any kind of commitment to performance. Do it jokingly, saying outrageous things jokingly, and you know I'm joking because they're so outrageous, and you can't believe anybody would say them, but that's how they make their millions. But there you go. All right, enough of the crazies. I appreciate your patience. Sometimes people want to know what they're thinking about on Earth 2. I kind of feel like I always know, but I like when they're more specific and just telling on themselves like that. All right. Here is President Biden yesterday introducing Bernie Sanders at that event celebrating the healthcare achievements of the administration. Bernie Sanders, a longtime leader on it. Here's that, the two of them hugging.
I'm proud of my administration has taken on Big Pharma in the most significant ways ever. And I wouldn't have done without Bernie. And Bernie got it. Look, Bernie was the one who was leading the way for decades, in which why we're here today. You know, Bernie mentioned Americans pay more for prescription drugs than any other advanced nation in the world. If you walk in a local drugstore here in America, the prices are at least 2 to 3 times more for the exact same prescription made by the exact same pharmaceutical company in Canada, France, Italy, and even in Eastern Europe, all around the world. But not anymore. For years, people have talked about how Medicare has the power to negotiate for lower drug prices, prescription drug prices the government pays for, just like the VA does when they're able to negotiate medicines and needs for the veterans. But we've tried and tried and tried. And finally, with Bernie's help, I finally got my Inflation Reduction Act, which passed. Bernie helped get it passed. Not one Republican in the entire Congress, this did surprise me, I have to admit to you, not one single Republican voted for it. Not one single one, to give us authority to take on and beat Big Pharma.
There you go, a little bit of the president yesterday from that event. He then introduced Bernie Sanders. They gave each other a little hug, and it was real nice. And finally, in the audio section, I've got a 3-minute report from Reuters on that attack from the Israeli military on the World Cultural Kitchen Organization. It includes audio of Jose Anders and more. And I just saw this and thought it would be worth sharing. It's tough, but real important, and they do a great job of putting it all together. So here it is from Reuters.
They were targeted systematically, car by car.
Celebrity chef Jose Andres told Reuters in an emotional interview on Wednesday that the Israeli airstrike that killed 7 of his World Central Kitchen aid workers in Gaza had been deliberately targeted, and he rejected Israeli and U.S. assertions that it was a mistake.
This was not just a bad luck situation where, we dropped the bomb in the wrong place or no. This was over 1.5, 1.8 kilometers with a very defined humanitarian convoy that had signs in the top, in the roof, a very colorful logo that we are obviously very proud of, but that's very clear who we are and what we do.
Andres said his charity group had clear communication with the Israeli military, which he said was aware of the convoy's whereabouts, and he called for investigations by the U.S. government and the home countries of every aid worker that was killed in the attack.
If we were targeted this way, I need to understand that this was no vicious. I need to understand that this was not by somebody that is above law and order, that decided just to kill us because, I don't know, maybe because I did a tweet that was very strong against President Netanyahu. I don't know. Obviously, that's why we need to have an investigation that is neutral and is above IDF. But what I know is that we were targeted deliberately, non-stop, until everybody was dead in this convoy.
The aid workers were killed when their convoy was hit shortly after they oversaw the unloading of 100 tons of food brought to Gaza by sea. Israel's military expressed, quote, severe sorrow over the incident, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called it unintentional. A U.S. official said President Joe Biden, who spoke to Andres on Tuesday, will speak by phone to Netanyahu on Thursday. The White House has described Biden as outraged by the attack, but the president has made no fundamental change in support for Israel in its war in Gaza. Meanwhile, the State Department said the U.S. wants a swift Israeli investigation into the incident. Here's State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller.
It doesn't really matter how they made the mistake. At the end of the day, you have 7 dead aid workers who were there trying to deliver humanitarian assistance. So whatever the reason was that led to this tragedy, whatever the mistake that happened inside the IDF, it's unacceptable.
Andres said his organization was still studying the safety situation in Gaza as it considers starting aid deliveries again. He also condemned the war in Gaza as a whole, noting that at least 196 humanitarian workers have been killed there since October, according to the United Nations.
At the time, this looks like it's not a war against terrorism anymore. Seems this is a war against humanity itself. You cannot be fighting the basis of what humanity should be standing for.
Okay, there you go, that package from Reuters. Real heavy, but important. And so now let's have some laughs thanks to ABC and Jimmy Kimmel Live.
Trump pulled a rabbit out of his MAGA hat. He managed to post that $175 million bond he couldn't get. He got one courtesy of the Knight Specialty Insurance Company, which I'm guessing did not Google the phrase, "Who is Donald Trump?" Somewhere there's a loan officer who just got called into his boss's office. You loaned $175 million to who? This is the man with the good sense to loan a lot of money to Donald Trump. There he is, the next owner of Mar-a-Lago, billionaire Don Henke, also known as the king of the subprime car loans. Don Henke, he sells loans to people with less than exceptional credit. Forbes said his company repossesses about 250 cars a day. Our former president got a loan from a repo man. And not just any run-of-the-mill repo man. His company is known for what they do is they fake their caller ID so it looks like they're calling from a local pizza place, and then they pounce. I would love to be there to see Trump waiting at the door for a meat lover supreme, only to find out his tower has been repossessed next door. Trump posted bond and then posted on Truth Social. This is one of the dozens of crazy things he wrote today. Please remember, all of these lawsuits, charges, and indictments that have been brought against me have been orchestrated and coordinated by crooked Joe Biden, which I have to say I find particularly upsetting because crooked was his nickname for Hillary. All right? It was Crooked Hillary, and you can't just reassign a nickname. You can't have Magic Johnson and Magic Larry Bird. It doesn't work like that. This is just lazy Donald Trumping is what it is. I know, you know what? I know he's not ashamed of anything, but he should at least be ashamed of this. He also called the charges in his latest New York fraud case a fabricated election interference con job, which I think is interesting because, I don't know if you remember, this was also his clue on Jeopardy.
Fabricated election interference con job. Allison?
It was Donald Trump?
Correct.
That is right.
All right, there you go. Jimmy Kimmel Live. Thank you for the laughs, everybody. Yeah, that was good. Good stuff. And now it's time to get to my guest, which is also great stuff. He is David Rothkopf. He's an author. He's the former head of a think tank, Foreign Policy Magazine. He is now the head of the Deep State Radio Network. Go subscribe to all of their amazing podcasts. Read him at the Daily Beast. So great still on Twitter. I click on his account every day because he's always very active sharing stories and thoughts on things. And I love talking with him. So let's get right to it. Jump right into the conversation. No small talk with Rothkopf today because we got very serious right away with his most recent piece at the Daily Beast out yesterday about the significance of the dual attacks from Israel against Iranian National Guard in Syria, as well as the humanitarian aid organization. His piece titled, Israel Risks Dire Consequences After Two Deadly Airstrikes, and that is where we start with Rothkopf today. Let's do it. And I have to start with this very serious issue. You've just posted a piece about it at the Daily Beast. Both of the most recent attacks, one on these Iranians in Syria, Iranian generals, and then obviously what happened with the humanitarian aid group in Gaza and what all that means. But go ahead and tell me a little bit about that article before I get too specific. I've just finished.
There were two strikes within a 24-hour period. Both of them have potentially very significant consequences. The strike on what was called the Iranian consulate in Damascus, or an annex building to their consulate, which killed a couple of Iranian generals, could have the effect of escalating the war. It's the first direct strike in what has thus far been a kind of shadow war with the Iranians. And it took out the man who is responsible for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's activities in Gaza. So that's significant. And the U.S. has been for a long time concerned that Israel would seek to escalate this war across its northern border with Hezbollah, which of course is an Iranian proxy. And there have been plenty of people who've been concerned that Netanyahu do that as a way of prolonging his time in office, because once the wars end and there is some return to normalcy in Israeli politics, it's expected he will be ousted. Having said that, in many respects, the more significant strike was a strike on convoy vehicles in Gaza moving along the sea that were occupied by people working for World Central Kitchen. Right. That's the Chef Jose Andres organization that goes wherever people are in need of food, and was in the process of bringing a lot of the food that is much needed to Gaza, which has been struck by famine and where the risks of famine death tolls rising dramatically are very high. The Israelis said it was an accident, but the vehicles were carefully marked. They had big logos on the roofs. The World Central Kitchen people had been very careful to let the Israelis know exactly where they were. They even reached out to the Israelis when the first munition detonated inside one of their vehicles.
They have the direct line, these humanitarian
They did,
groups.
and they communicated, and yet the Israelis nonetheless struck 2 more times, hitting all 3 vehicles, which were spread out over 2.4 kilometers. So to suggest that it was an accident is ludicrous. Now, might a lower-level officer have made a bad decision? Yes, and I think that's the question. The question is, was it a lower-level officer or a higher-level officer or somebody in a political role who made this decision? Certainly, it is a manifestation of a series of attacks that have occurred against humanitarian workers in Gaza since the start of the war. The number is right now around 200 aid workers have been killed. And as bad as it is, and one of the things I talk about in the article is who the people were. I'm a friend of mine, Nate Mook, who was
You knew him.
is the CEO of World Central Kitchen. He knew him, and so I talked to him about them.
Oh, a friend of yours knew Nate Mook. This is one of the people.
No, Nate Mook is my friend, and so he talked about 2 of the people who were killed, two of the people who were killed, who he had been in contact with in just the past couple of weeks. And it's a tragic story. These are people who are traveling far away from their homes to just help people. But a greater tragedy is likely to ensue because World Central Kitchen immediately stopped its activities in Gaza. So did a couple of other organizations, Project Hope, Amnera, which is a local organization serving the Middle East. And so right at the moment when Gaza is most in need, some of the people who would be most helpful in addressing these problems have left because the Israelis are not only not protecting humanitarian workers, but they seem to be either targeting them or treating them in a way that shows disregard for their safety, much as they've done with journalists, and of course, more importantly, much as they've done with Palestinian civilians. The death toll right now in Gaza is around 33,000. Something like 70,000 people have been injured. So that's 100,000 people in a population of about 2.2 million who have suffered physical harm. But that doesn't count the million or so who are right now at risk of famine. Everybody, if you live in Gaza, you're suffering. And this strike, I think, is going to have other kinds of ramifications as well, because as in Washington, the World Central Kitchen is probably the favorite aid organization there is. Jose Andres is seen as a saint. 2 months ago, Nancy Pelosi nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. Yeah. And to strike them just strikes a nerve here in Washington.
Yeah, I wonder. That's what I wonder. I've been thinking about that. I don't know much, but I think he's also really well known around the world. Internationally, he might be the most well-known face in humanitarian aid because wherever terrible things happen, that guy seems to show up, from Puerto Rico to tornado-affected regions and all over the world, earthquakes and other places. And how much does public opinion matter or affect government, the Israeli leadership's decisions? At what point aren't we seeing a sea change of public opinion throughout this conflict lately?
I think that's true. I've seen some interviews with some Israelis that say it's starting to take a toll. Of course, we're well into this. It should have taken a toll a long time ago. Sure. There was a Gallup poll in the United States last week that showed the majority of Americans now, 55% of Americans, oppose the way Israel is conducting itself in this conflict. That's extraordinarily high for the United States. And of course, many other countries in the world have much more negative opinions. And that said, the Israelis, Netanyahu is taking the Trump playbook and owning being a pariah. The rest of the world is wrong. I'm right. I'm the only one who can save you. And that is, of course, demented behavior. But there is a pretty significant portion of folks in the Israeli political elite who just think they know better and nobody else understands their situation. And they've been attacked in the past in terms of public opinion. Sure. And I think they think they're just going through the same old thing. This is not the same old thing.
It does not seem to be.
And I think they don't realize the degree to which their global standing has been damaged by this, possibly for many years, possibly for a generation, as I think we've talked about in the past. If you're under 35, your view is Israel is an aggressor and an abuser of international law. You do not have recollection of Israel standing up against its neighbors. It's just too long ago. And I think things have changed for Israel, and Israel doesn't realize it. And in particular, one can't speak of what a government or a country thinks, but in particular, the people in this government are just clueless as to the damage that they are doing, or they don't care because their main goal is, to keep Bibi Netanyahu in power. We'll see, but it's an awful situation.
Did you read the reporting that apparently the disgraced former president, who Israel is counting on being reelected, at least the leadership there, I should say, Bibi Netanyahu, apparently told a couple of Israeli journalists, surprised them when he said that basically Israel needs to wrap this up pretty quickly. He surprised them with his reaction as opposed to let them, as a Republican congressman said this week, be Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Trump seems to be changing his tune. Do you read much into that reporting? Does it matter?
I think it matters to the extent to which Trump doesn't care about Israel a bit.
Right.
Trump only cares about Trump. So why would Trump say that? Well, he would say it because he knows he's got to cleave close to Netanyahu, and he thinks it may be damaging to him. And he doesn't care what policies he embraces. This guy wants to get reelected because he doesn't want to go to jail. And he's just thinking, this is getting ugly and it's going to be hard for me. And so please change. So I'll love you later. Just let's get this out of the way until the election.
What do you make of the Biden administration's response? The president put out a statement. We heard from the Secretary of State and others from the administration, of course, and sounds very compassionate, at the same time sneaking weapons out the back door to Israel. Doing one thing, saying one thing, and doing something different is the way that a lot of people are seeing this, David Rothkopf.
Yeah, that's the way I think you have to see it. They said they were outraged at the World Central Kitchen attack. But at the same token, John Kirby, the National Security Council spokesman, said that there was no sign that the Israelis knew what they were doing or that it wasn't an accident. I don't think that's true. I think there's a lot of evidence to that effect. Secretary Blinken made stronger remarks about this and how much we need to protect humanitarian aid. But as you say, there have been a couple of recent announcements of deals with Israel, including most recently an agreement to send them F-15s. And I think that's a mistake. Right now, it is in the national interest of the United States for this conflict to end. It is also the right thing for this conflict to end. The United States should be using every bit of leverage it's got to end the conflict. And I think that should include, at this point, stopping the provision of all offensive weapons to Israel, period. All aid that can be used to support a war like this, period. Not forever, but until the Israelis not only agree to a ceasefire, agree to providing the humanitarian aid safely to the people of Gaza, but also accept the path to a two-state solution. It is not in our interest to continue to supply weapons to an ally who is using those weapons to undermine our foreign policy and to do damage to our standing, not to mention, of course, the grievous human cost of all of this. So, as we've talked about it before, I think that the time for this change, but it's still true today, and it's impossible to express outrage and provide bombs and munitions. It's hypocritical, and I don't think senior people in the administration, particularly the president, understand what has changed in the U.S.-Israel dynamic and in how the United States should be approaching Israel going forward.
They better soon. They better catch up quickly, I think. What about the talks that are happening now between Saudi Arabia, these talks that got, I think, postponed a couple months ago. You wrote about that then. Are you paying attention to that? Could that be a major breakthrough for the region, much less the Arabs and Israelis?
Well, first of all, I think you're referring to the fact that Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, has gone over to Saudi Arabia. They're trying to keep this big deal alive. This was the deal that, in some respects, precipitated this war because the people of Hamas and I think the Iranians who sponsor them looked at the idea that Israel would normalize with Saudi Arabia, which plays not just a large role as a big country in the region, but as the keeper of the two holy mosques, it plays a special role in Islam. And the idea that somehow the Saudis would be like, yeah, okay, we'll do normalization. We don't care about the Palestinians, really was a trigger. Now, having said that, one would have to see what this deal looked like. It is hard to imagine that any country in the Arab world, including Saudi Arabia, could enter into a normalization deal that did not include a path to a two-state solution. The Israeli government is explicitly opposed to that, although they do not offer any reasonable alternative. And I think achieving such a deal that is well structured and that is not just a Band-Aid to make it look like life is returning to normal is unlikely. Right. And I don't think it's what we should be working on now. I think we should be working with the regional powers to say, here is the road ahead. And the road ahead involves rebuilding Gaza, managing Gaza independently, putting in place Palestinian leadership that can speak for the Palestinian people and negotiate a way to a two-state solution, and also getting a change in the Israeli leadership. And those things all must occur before any future normalization should take place.
Okay, let's get out of the Middle East and come to a feeling. You wrote about a feeling last at the Daily Beast, inspired by the passing of your friend recently, Bernard Schwartz. You talked about optimism and why it matters in such a divisive year. And I really enjoyed this, and I wanted you to try to convince folks. I don't need much convincing on optimism. It's my default most of the time, not all the time, but I still enjoyed reading this and want you to make the case for folks in this crazy year.
Yeah, Bernard was a guy I'd known for a long time and had worked with for a long time on a lot of political things. He was a big donor to the Democratic Party. He was a very successful businessman who died a few weeks ago at the age of 98. And he was relentlessly optimistic, even when he saw the threat of Trump, or he saw the threat of economic downturns, or he saw other kinds of threats. He believed that we could manage those threats. And in many ways, he echoed Joe Biden, who he supported very vigorously, because essentially his life story was growing up in the Depression, going through World War II, going through the divisive years of the 1960s, going from a country with Jim Crow laws to one without, going to progress on women's issues and LGBT and other. He saw us overcome a lot. And he believed that we would do the same now and in the future. And I think that a case can be made for that. Trump was president. He's not president anymore. Trump lost a bunch of elections. Republicans have done consistently badly in elections. They have not produced the story of the Biden administration, one of the most productive in modern history, versus the story of Trump, is one of real strong contrast. And literally days before he died, we were talking about him doing, or us doing together, an op-ed on those issues, because we wrote op-eds together. And I think his main thrust was Trump can be beaten, MAGA can be beaten, it can be beaten by a lot, it can be the end of that movement, democracy in the United States can be saved, and that if he were a betting man, he would bet on that happening. And I agree with that. Shouldn't be a source of complacency. And I saw, like everybody else, polls yesterday that showed in 6 out of 7 battleground states, Trump with a slight lead. But I think the polls are wrong. I think that the GOP continues to make some terrible choices with regard to not only candidates, but its stance on policy issues like abortion.
Yeah, did you pay attention to this Florida thing the other day where they...
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really, I think it's a real fascinating thing, because now they outlawed abortion after 6 weeks of court, but they also, on the ballot, they're going to have a referendum, and you just mentioned where that's gone. on this issue, and they have marijuana on the ballot, and that's going to get I just wonder what's going to happen in Florida with the whole election, because those are down ballot referendum issues. Those people are then probably going to, maybe they'll vote for Democrats as well. Is there any hope?
That's
Florida?
right. And for the abortion issue to pass, for abortion to be guaranteed as a right, or reproductive rights to be guaranteed to women on the Florida ballot in November, it requires a 60% vote. So that means that all those groups that are going to be out there working on this thing are going to be trying to get people to the polls who are not going to be Trump supporters. They are not there. And there is a certain purpleness in parts of Florida that suggests that's possible. And we have seen in election after election, when this kind of issue is on the ballot, it leads to a turnout not just of Democrats, but of independents who oppose Trump. And that could be a very bad thing for Trump. And it's on the issue. It's on the ballot. I don't know, 7 states and a bunch of states in November. And so that's another reason why one should be fairly optimistic. A good economy is a reason you should be fairly optimistic. The effectiveness of the president as a campaigner, as we saw during the State of the Union, is another reason, or the vice president as a campaigner. The ineffectiveness of the Republicans on Capitol Hill, which is just every week there's some new comedy of errors led by Mike Johnson or Mitch McConnell or all of them. And their margin is shrinking and shrinking. It's not impossible that the GOP margin in the House could disappear between now and the election. That you could have Hakeem Jeffries as Speaker of the House before the election if a couple of Republicans leave. But the Republicans on the Hill have got to be looking with some concern at the Lara Trump-led Republican National Committee, which has said, no, this money's going to Trump.
Yeah, not only
ballot.
Not only for his campaign potentially, but just for his legal bills. Like people just
well, exactly, and they're way behind in fundraising anyway. So if you siphon off a bunch of their funds and use the funds in order to help prop up Trump, then it's not going to go to people running for the Senate or the House. It's going to make it harder for them to win.
Yeah, for sure. It matters. All that matters. Did you see the one-day news cycle bubble of Truth Social was worth billions, and Trump's portion of it was going to be like, I don't know, they were saying he made $5 billion in a day or something. And the next day, they found out it was a complete empty egg. It lost all of whatever it had the day before, and Trump is now suing them. That was the weirdest news cycle story because it made it look like Truth Social was worth a lot. Trump is going to have a whole bunch of money to pay off his legal bills. And then the next day, Trump's, I'm going to sue him.
Actually, it's not quite exactly like that. Everybody knew that Truth Social was a loser.
Anybody who paid attention to it, yeah. But if you just read headlines, you thought, oh, my gosh.
And then they do this deal with this SPAC and seem to create a stock that's got a lot of value. And Trump's share was supposed to be worth something like $3 billion. What was the $6 billion company doing? We have them filing, as you have to, with the SEC, their 10K. And what does it show? It shows a company that had revenues of $4 million that lost $59 million. A company that is worth dramatically less than the Pete Dominick broadcasting empire, but much less. And I don't know how many billions you value.
I have a standing desk.
Yeah, okay, so that's worth something. And you have a microphone, and you've got. But the point is, your company, my company, small companies are worth dramatically more than this, and that this was a scam. This was a pump and dump. It was like, let's go in, let's get a bunch of people, suckers, to buy this stock, and then at a certain point, we will get out of it, and we'll get out of it ahead of them. The stock will fall, but we will have translated the paper value of the stock into monetary value that they can put in their pocket. The problem is for Trump, he couldn't do that for 6 months based on this thing. And this thing came out and the stock is plummeting and plummeting. And folks, if you're listening, I'm not an investment advisor. I'm in no position to be able to give advice. I don't think Pete is either, but you got to have your head examined. If you would put $1 of your money in this ridiculous scam, which is designed only to prop up Trump. Now, the other part of this was that Trump began, as soon as he goes into this deal and he sees there's some value there, he goes, well, you know, these people that I founded Truth Social with, I don't like the job they did. I want to cut them out of their chance to make money off of this deal. And their share would have been $650 million or something. And Trump's, no, I want that. That's going to me. It was pure greed and a classic example of how Donald Trump will screw any partner he's got to make one extra dime.
The SPAC was basically a fundraiser for the company. That's what it is.
The SPAC was a fundraiser.
Bring him the opportunity.
There was one of the big investors in the SPAC, a guy, I think his name is Jeffrey Yaz, Y-A-S, who was a big Trump fundraiser and a big Republican donor. And I think he was trying to help out Trump. He was also, by the way, however, a big investor in ByteDance, which is the owner of Tik Tok. And so he was the one who went to Trump and said, hey, maybe we're not against this TikTok deal. Maybe we're not going to force TikTok into a deal like this. Maybe we'll let it go. It's corrupt. It stinks to the heavens. It's literally the kind of thing where it's like, hey, here's the presidential candidate engaged in a giant scam, ripping off millions of people on TV in real time. And people are like, yeah, okay.
It's just more proof. It's like when he doesn't like anybody who supports him or whoever served him, he throws them under the bus, but go ahead and make him a deal. Go ahead and try to make money off of this.
I defy you every single day, there is a story that would have disqualified some other candidate.
Yeah, sure.
Let's set all this aside for a second. Let's go back a couple of weeks. Let's take the most trivial story possible. The idea that Donald Trump would announce that he has won for yet another year his club championship at his golf club, which is so ludicrous and so pathetic.
He put out an announcement that he won the tournament and beat even some pros or something. Yeah,
there are people, Rick O'Reilly, who've written about what a cheater Trump is. Now, if you took anybody else, if you said a story and you said Barack Obama or Joe Biden lied about winning his club championship and cheats at golf, and here are 15 cases of it, as trivial as that would be, that would have ended their careers.
Yeah. And think about how bad it was. And it was bad, but still, when Gavin Newsom was telling everybody to isolate and mask up, and he had a party, he had some friends over, it was very bad for Gavin Newsom, as it should be. But your point is that kind of a thing happens far worse every day, and nothing disqualifies the guy.
Remember Howard Dean?
The scream, sure. He deserved that. That was a weird noise that left his body, and he never should have been able to.
But he was like, and all of a sudden, his career is over.
Made everybody very uncomfortable, including
because he made a weird.
He deserved to go down
noise.
In flames for that.
Ed Muskie, nobody remembers Ed Muskie, but he was running for president, and a snowflake got in his eye or something, and it looked like he was crying in the midst of something.
You can't cry.
And they were like, "Oh no, sorry, he's out."
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We're in a new world with a new media atmosphere and a new attitude towards just winning at all costs and thumping the people that you don't like really destroying them because of course.
Barack Obama got in trouble for wearing a tan suit, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, he deserved that as well. I think that should have brought down the nation. I was the leader.
You were anti-tan suit.
Oh, it was so wrong. It was so unpresidential. And then, thought it was terrible.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Trump could wear a tank top and the intercontinental belt in the Oval Office, and people would be like, "Oh, that's fantastic."
Meanwhile, Trump goes on TV every day and looks like he has a head full of pea soup.
It sounds like it too. Yeah,
it doesn't. He just doesn't. He doesn't. He's incoherent half the time.
What do you make, before I let you go, of the latest? Pick one. I suppose Aileen Cannon seems to be the most outrageous, but you've got this trial starting in Manhattan, April 15th. You've got the rest of them. There's headlines every day. It's hard to keep track. What are you following? What do you want to remark upon?
I follow all of them. I think the Aileen Cannon thing is quite interesting. Jack Smith yesterday evening filed within a half an hour of the deadline a response to queries she made saying, please respond to these kinds of jury instructions, both of which, there were two sets of jury instructions, were based on a fallacy about the Presidential Records Act. And Jack Smith essentially said, both of these are based on a fallacy. and you need to make a ruling on them right away, because if you do support this kind of an argument, we're essentially going to go and appeal this to a higher court and get you kicked off this case.
Right.
And it's been a long time coming. I think there are 100 reasons to have her kicked off the case, but it'll be interesting to see what she does. My own guess is she'll go, thanks, and not make that decision, because what she wants to do is to prolong her role in this, to defer the case as long as she can, because that's what Trump wants, because he wants it pushed beyond the election. And having said that, she is incompetent and corrupt. She has got her thumb on the scale for Trump, and the sooner she's off the case, the better. As far as the other case in New York,
he could go to jail, I heard. Andrew Weissman, he's one of those MSNBC legal experts, good guy, smart guy. He says he could go to jail.
Well, he could go to jail. He should go to jail. Trump should go to jail. If he was anybody else and he stole documents that he stole, he'd be in jail waiting trial. Sure. If he was anybody else and he attacked a judge and he threatened people, he would go to jail. He would be waiting for trial in jail. The court system has bent over backwards for this guy for his entire career. That is, rich white guys get a free pass. He's been committing fraud, tax fraud, rape, sexual abuse, violating obstruction of justice 11 or 12 times in the Mueller case, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He's gotten away with it all. Cases like the Bragg case, they're minimizing it. Trump team is minimizing its significance because he could very well get found guilty of a felony in New York. And honestly, it's not a case about some little thing. He sat in the Oval Office and he wrote a check to somebody who suppressed a story to help him get elected. And the only reason to suppress the story was to ensure that the public didn't have enough information about him when it came around to voting. It is election interference as much as January 6th is election interference. It was the first sign that he was going to do this, or one of the early signs that he's going to do this. It's the same case. Donald Trump lies to the American public, lies to anybody he has to in order to get his way. The laws be damned. And so I think it's an important case.
I think his fans and supporters are like, what's wrong? It's awesome. He had sex with a porn star. That's awesome.
And I think a lot of them will go, oh, well, New York jury. It's a New York jury, which, by the way, let's be clear, what they really mean is a bunch of people of color and Jews. They're like saying, no, those people, we can't trust those kind of people. And they say it, everybody, all these Republicans who once were considered mainstream Republicans are constantly saying things. Lindsey Graham said, no, we can't get a fair trial in New York.
Right.
Which is outrageous. They're second guessing one of the pillars of American democracy. And I think it is a travesty that the right to a speedy trial on behalf of the American people is not being respected. The American people have a right to know whether the next president of the United States stole, mishandled national security documents, including documents pertaining to nuclear capabilities, in a way that would have anybody else tossed in the slammer.
I feel like this has made you a Merrick Garland critic because it's all taken so long.
Everybody I know who knows Merrick Garland, I'm not one of them, thinks he's a great guy.
Yeah.
But I think he and others in the Justice Department have bent over too far backwards so that they would not be accused of being political.
Right.
In so
they
doing,
are anyway. They've
become political.
Yeah.
And frankly, it's a bit self-serving on their part. It's like saying, I will be perceived in a certain kind of a way. But does it help the system of justice? Does it actually get us closer to a just outcome? It does not.
All right, my friend. Thank you, as always, for joining me. Excellent work. We appreciate you.
We appreciate you. Thank you very much.
All right, there you go. Did you notice there was kind of an abrupt ending? Because he and I talked about, baking and pies and snacking for 10 minutes at the end. And I'm just not sure it was worth sharing it with you. It might have been boring. He and I got a kick out of it, though, so I just cut that out. So in case you noticed the abrupt ending, we We always say goodbye. We always say hello. We always have a great talk. And I love him. I hope you appreciated that conversation with David Rothkopf. And if so, I hope you go let him know on Twitter, where he's still very active. I refuse to call it X in case you haven't known. You bumblebees here at the end are the greatest, the MVPs of my life. I am so grateful for your support. Thank you, thank you, thank you. John Carroll taking us out as he does every day, and I'll be back here tomorrow, and I hope to see you at tonight's Hangout. Join us anytime on the Discord platform where you're never alone. I'm done talking. John Carroll can start.
Keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up and show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.